I can recall being as young as 9 years old when I decided that I wanted to pursue filmmaking as a career, and that passion culminated into me spending any and all of my free time growing up reading Wikipedia pages about actors and the films they had starred in, or watching all the media I had access to and was interested in, or writing out elongated film treatments of fictional storylines I thought I could potentially direct in the future. And out of the handful of storylines I wrote until I was 12, almost 13 years old, and that were either based on inserting myself into a franchise or from what I got inspired by, the first of those was the one that stood out to me the most. It turned out that in my high school's video production course, I would decide to revisit this one story in an assignment, but compromise with the skills and materials I had whilst using stop motion techniques, and it would become one of the first videos uploaded onto my YouTube channel. But I came to realize that I never told it in the way I originally wrote it, and I figured a summary of what the actual story was all about, with some modern edits of course, would be perfect to share with you first in our story. Long ago, there was a creative young girl named Casey, who had often escaped into the realm of her imagination. After coming home from school and having completed her homework, her bedroom was a figurative canvas for play, with the television and toys in her room being her biggest inspirations. Her dreaming didn't begin nor cease when it was time to rest for the next day. In fact, the moment she closed her eyes, she was transported into a fully realized world of her own creation, simply called imagination. This place consisted of an inclusive community of both familiar and unique characters, including another young girl who went by Andy, who was the overseer of all of imagination, and who would be a great mentor and friend to our protagonist. Most of the time, Casey's dreams were an outlet to celebrate herself in a world that happily accepted her. It was a safely guarded place that shined brightly in both daylight and starlight. But there was one occasion where the shadow, imagination's most formidable foe, would engulf the land entirely in darkness. The shadow's army, called the Silhouettes, would intrude on occasion, but nothing could have prepared the girls for the shadow, whom singles out Casey as a target. On this sudden occasion, Casey, left alone with only hope and a key necklace Andy had gifted her when they first met, is surrounded by darkness and isolation, except for the shadow's tactics in having her succumb to both. It only got stronger when Casey tried to confront it, tried to question it, tried to stand up for herself. At a strangely destined moment, Casey's key necklace began to twinkle a light that illuminated the shape of a star in the face of the shadow, and was so bright it stabbed its heart and turned the once villainous essence into ash. When reunited with Andy, it was confirmed that imagination was saved, and the key in this story was Casey exuding the confidence she once admired being unique to her friend. And the story concludes with Casey and Andy offering a see you later kind of farewell, with Casey seen wearing that necklace across her neck as the next morning in the real world approaches. It's important to note that the reason for the see you later response wasn't just because there was a promise for Casey to arrive back to imagination when she began to dream once again. It's unveiled that two supposed keys to the land exist, because Andy, who's said to be a little older than the protagonist, is actually Casey's future self. Calling back to when they first met, it was clear that Casey was evidently in awe of this place, but wasn't sure if she ever belonged anywhere, in imagination or in the real world. When Andy first makes eye contact with Casey, she assures her that Casey isn't ever alone, giving her that aforementioned key to imagination, and Casey couldn't help but present a smile just as radiant in response. This narrative was centered on this video's forthcoming story. Andy is my current self and is Alex. And Casey is my younger self, and her real name is Lauren. Lauren looked so often into the future, and in the present felt she had to consistently prove herself as capable of fulfilling a meaningful purpose in her life, specifically through her creativity. So at a time when she nearly succumbed to the shadow, and when she needed that very message in the most pivotal moment of her life thus far, it was Alex who said assuringly to Lauren, "I'm different too." Hello everyone. For those of you familiar or unfamiliar with my YouTube channel, my real name is Lauren, but you can just call me Alex. At 2 years old, I was given an official medical diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. 10 years later, at 12 years old, I was watching the 2011 film Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close with my family when I suddenly noticed certain scenes paralleling my own life experiences. After confronted with that movie-like moment, I found out from my parents that same night that I was indeed autistic. Now at 22 years old, it's been 20 years as of my diagnosis and 10 years as of that first self-revelation of being on the autism spectrum. And over the past decade, I've slowly embraced it as a facet of who I am. This actually isn't the first time I've opened up about being autistic, and it certainly isn't the last. While my family and relatives are aware, I very slowly began sharing about it on rare occasions with a few friends I made between the time I had found out up to my senior year of high school, because it really was me partaking into the college application process where I began to truly put my story on the spectrum into words and had the confidence to do so more often than before. The first time I candidly opened up about my life perspective on the spectrum on this YouTube channel was in a video I released on Autism Awareness and Acceptance Day back in 2018, titled "I Thought I Was Normal Too," and it was one of my favorite projects I created up to that point for that reason. And now, this is the second time I'm doing so. I didn't realize how impactful my voice as an openly autistic person truly was until long after I released I Thought I Was Normal Too. The video was this perfect opportunity for me to come to terms with my diagnosis, and with that knowledge and hindsight understanding being expressed, to be able to move forward into a greater appreciation for it. The overarching story of that video centered itself around that personal growth I saw in myself because I completed that project that I had wanted to make for a really long time, and the timing couldn't have been better. It's actually ignited in me an ambition to learn more about and create more content surrounding disability representation in the media space, as well as be an advocate of sorts for the condition. Hence, I decided to essentially remaster that video with the different perspective I've gained and with the skills and equipment I've acquired since to be put into use. Additionally, I wanted to emphasize that autism is a spectrum. Each and every individual living with any kind of disability or disorder or unique condition has their own story to tell, and it is their choice as to whether they choose to share about it or not. It was my personal decision to be open about my story and viewpoints, both of which are solely unique to me, and it's a path I've taken that's been the best decision I could have made. So in recognition of autism awareness and acceptance needing to be present every day of the year, I'll be presenting this discussion on autism through my point of view, and differently than I did in the past, by placing anecdotal chapters as talking points, starting with how I was diagnosed 2 decades ago. Like many other stories told by and about autistic people, my story begins when I was given an official diagnosis of autism. but I didn't know what it meant nor that it was a part of me. By the time I was 2 years old, I had been developing like any other child when those milestones appeared to regress. I became completely quiet, gesturing or pointing rather than communicating vocally. I didn't respond to my name at times and essentially kept to myself. Out of concern, my parents took me to 3 different doctors, and I was given a diagnosis of a pervasive developmental disability not otherwise specified, or PDD-NOS. Eventually, it was clear that through many tests and evaluations in these sort of visits, I was autistic. Some of the traits I inhabited, especially at a younger age, included but possibly wasn't limited to having to learn to display appropriate reactions, body language, and eye contact, difficulty initiating and engaging in conversations, comprehending communication in terms of expressing language, pitch, and tone, experiencing heightened and visual and sound sensitivities, as well as overstimulation in certain environments, experiencing meltdowns, anxiousness, and/or varying emotional reactions in overwhelming social situations, particularly reacting in distraught through crying, sensitivities with textures and smells in food, leading to specific preferences, possessing a preoccupation with objects, potentially to a point that I would organize objects in an orderly manner, wandering or spinning in circles or biting my nails, and possessing a general lack of/delay in motor and cognitive development. After getting diagnosed, I was placed in cognitive, speech, and music therapies, in addition to learning baby sign language and practicing language and developmental skills at home. I was also placed in various extracurriculars, activities, and social events right as I started school. While it was great to soak in these sort of experiences, I certainly needed support through them, even the ones I enjoyed. And unfortunately, the social and interactive aspects of the world around me just weren't as accommodating to maneuver. These outings could become quite a handful task for myself and others looking after me, so there was always a challenge in taking me everywhere and anywhere life can take you, ranging from vacations to hanging out at a family member's house. From an academic standpoint, I attended a preschool as one for children who have, quote, special needs, which was how it was termed at that time, and my parents were significant advocates in seeing me excel beyond that path of schooling. So I was placed in the mainstream educational route for K-12. All of my time in school certainly offered its triumphs and tribulations, but while my time in elementary and middle school offered many challenges, my time in high school and university, fortunately, offered an overall better experience along with many challenges as well. I had quite a lot of behavioral issues growing up that I'd later realized were based around me being autistic, so in retrospect, that vindication has made me realize how far my development has come since. Starting on a positive note, I excelled in projects and assignments as best I could in elementary school, and the ability to narrow my focus and productivity on individual projects especially worked out well in my favor. I was usually capable of completing a task on my own when I can master it or if it allowed for an outlet of self-expression. At that young age, I flourished when I was in any kind of environment that allowed me to comfortably be myself, even if it were only temporary. But the social aspects of childhood weren't a strength of mine whatsoever. In the classroom, it really was the group work and communication as well as public speaking that was a large adversity for me, and I didn't have the best interactions with teachers. Sometimes I needed additional attention and energy given towards finishing something in class. Sometimes I did something wrong and got in trouble, and I would know why and follow through with something enforced. But sometimes I wouldn't have any comprehension as to exactly why and felt self-isolated, especially in those occasions where I had to be separated from everyday activities. Outside of that space, I did get teased, such as with a nickname of Crybaby, and was bullied. While I had a few friendships that only lasted a little while, and some acquaintances that I had in that period of time, I felt outcast from my cohorts who can somehow navigate socializing more organically, not to mention my sensory sensitivities having an effect on how or whether I would be able to attend field trips, school assemblies, among other larger gatherings. And admittedly, I wasn't an approachable and wonderful kid to be around. I did get frustrated, irritable, inexorable, and turn others away. Regardless of the reason, there were principal's office visits and conferences and talks with after-school childcare regarding me, and the reaction I felt a lot at a young age was feeling misunderstood, and I struggled relating or opening up to anyone. Much of this transferred over to when I was in middle school, with the increased workload and amount of classroom environments being something to adjust to. With the exception of finding a friend group to sit with in 8th grade, I had a few acquaintances. Overall, I didn't succeed socially at this time in my life, and encountering a few bullying incidents and tension from a few interactions were testaments to that. I did the best I could, but I knew I was struggling a lot emotionally and didn't properly release it. A large component of it was that I especially struggled, like other preteens, with my self-esteem and my sense of self. As of kindergarten, I was granted an individual education plan or an IEP. Essentially, it offers disability services and related accommodations that enabled my learning, and I specifically utilized it for taking exams, such as the opportunity for an added time extension and an ability to go to a separate testing room to reduce related anxieties I experienced. However, when I remained enrolled in speech therapy on campus up to the start of middle school, I recall feeling restless because I hadn't phased out of it like other peers of mine had before me. All I was aware of from my parents was that I needed resources for learning in speech because when I was a toddler, I was non-conventionally quiet and was not developing like I was supposed to. So when I was placed into the middle school's resource program, which included a class period automatically filled into my schedule, I didn't mind keeping to myself in that designated classroom to have extra time completing homework while at school and have a break from socializing with others. Even the teacher who led that program was a teacher that I really appreciated being there for me and was approachable. But I kept asking why. A question that I internally asked myself a lot. At school, at home, everywhere. My parents, on a bookshelf shared between all of the family, had a handful of books regarding the topics of disabilities and special needs. But I figured it was them looking out for me and searching for answers, much like they did in looking out and finding resources that would help me succeed. My siblings went to a different preschool than I did, but I figured it was because my parents found a better program that was closer to them to commute to. And yet I can vaguely think back to a feeling in my heart that there was something unique to me that made me different, that made my viewpoint of the world different. I just didn't know why I was who I was. My questioning of my identity kept playing in the back of my mind. Much like the original story I had been writing, it felt like this uncertainty was translated into this eerily metaphorical shadow that clouded my own reality. And sure enough, I would find out. I believe that it was spring break of 2012, possibly aligning with Easter, which was at the start of April that year. I was 12 years old when I was invited to once again gather around the living room couch to watch a film with my family. On this night, the selection happened to be a film that I heard about because it had been nominated in awards season, but otherwise didn't know anything about it. And that film was 2011's Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. For those who haven't seen the film, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close is about Oscar Schell, a young boy with the autism diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, a creative decision unique from the story's originating novel. A significant plot point in the narrative is that his father worked in the World Trade Center and had sadly passed away on 9/11. With this personal loss, Oscar is left to navigate the needed personal closure and grief from this tragedy, which is referred to as the worst day throughout the film, and sets out to embark on an expedition across New York City that his father had left behind for him to complete. It's established that this sort of expedition, consisting of clues and tasks, was one of the ways he bonded with his father. So when Oscar unexpectedly discovers a key in his home, which is the catalyst of this quest, he sets out to find answers about where the key's lock could be, with, in addition to this, the unveiled assistance and guidance from his mother, who Oscar bonds with by the film's conclusion upon seeing how much she's cared for him along the way. Although I had detected his social awkwardness as well as his distinct body language, emotional reactions, and sensory sensitivities to the world around him, I didn't revelate upon these parallels I noticed with Oscar until his quest truly began. There's one scene in particular where Oscar, the main character and narrator of the story, endures what I can only describe as sensory overload. The corners of the frame are blurred as a montage commences of certain things that he doesn't necessarily like, and that makes day-to-day life a little more challenging for him. The shot composition is riddled with dissolved transitions into variously angled extreme close-ups, with an emphasis on the sound design increasing into volume up to when he's on the Brooklyn Bridge. At one moment, we see a flashback of his father offering a monologue. He encourages Oscar to go on the same swing set in a local park that he was taken to as a child. But Oscar declines due to him seeing the supposedly joyous activity as dangerous, and it lastly cuts to Oscar using a handy tambourine as his coping mechanism to begin overcoming his fears and social anxieties. As the scene ended, I had my laptop beside me and I decided to look up the film's Wikipedia page. I had a curiosity about Oscar as a character and what he was portraying on screen, and saw an embedded link to a page defining Asperger's syndrome, which led to another page about autism spectrum disorder. Just at a glance, with one click onto the page, I was identifying some of the traits found in autistic people paralleling me, whilst my mind was instantaneously flooded with images and memories. I was enclosed in this weird movie-like realization that I was autistic when I had run upstairs to my room, turned off my computer, and laid on my bed attempting to process it all. Sometime later, I shared to my parents how I was feeling. At this moment, I had made enough connections in my mind to where I full-heartedly knew that I was autistic. And I was right. My parents confirmed that at 2 years old I was diagnosed, and all I can do was cry. Much like Oscar's shell, I held a key, which held everything I had just learned as well as the callbacks to my childhood. And that night, I was presented with a key's lock that was to give me answers regarding a part of who I was. I didn't honestly know anything about autism until I had found out, so having a name for what made me different was quite overwhelming in itself, and this was the start of me continually learning more about the developmental disability as I progressed in my own life. And obviously this meant looking at sources outside of Wikipedia to further understand it. The week after the revelation was numbing, in the sense that it felt like the one question running through my mind was what the heck I was to do with this newly found part of myself. Taking from the analogy of keys, I had two options for which door or path I would ultimately decide to unlock and step through. Option 1 was to submerge and withhold being autistic. Through this option, I would carry on attempting to fit in as normal, and aim for an ideal vision of perfection that I had often seen through the neurotypical lens I had grown up around. Option 2 was to embrace and openly and confidently express being autistic. Through this option, I would accept my differences and aim for an ideal vision of perfection that's unique to my own neurodiverse way of belonging. With these two representative doors held in front of me, I knew that in order to begin to personally move forward and find closure with that night's events, I had to make a choice. The first piece of media that aided in that decision was a talk show clip on YouTube promoting the 2011 film Bully that I actually had watched when it was released on DVD. It happened to be of an interview hosted on The Ellen Show that was posted onto YouTube a couple weeks before, featuring the family of an autistic teenager who sadly took his own life as a result of the constant bullying he endured. After the video had ended, I cried for at least 5 minutes straight just from how devastating the story was to listen to. And it was not only the first time I heard of a perspective from another autistic person, but it's also the first time I could relate that perspective to me. Since then, I came to see how impactful it's been for me to get to know and listen to the perspectives of other autistic people. Getting to know about public figures like Temple Grandin and discovering so many YouTube channels run by autistic content creators has encouraged me to feel less alone. There's something about nonfiction content covering autism in general that I find myself anchoring to all the time. I think it's because I get to see other human beings thrive and be so openly themselves. And having come from feeling like an outcast for so long, just hearing of someone else who was autistic meant a lot to me because I wasn't around a lot of other people who also were diagnosed. For this reason, YouTube was the outlet that enabled me to choose the second, more optimistic path of embracing life as an openly autistic, who was only just beginning to come out of her shell. As I carried on through middle school, it really wasn't until the end of 8th grade where I began on occasion to share that I was autistic. At the time, I did refer to the functioning labels that were common to use with autism, and did so for a little while before I began a few years ago to just refer to myself as autistic or refer to autism spectrum disorder. I do remember that there was a brochure type project I made in one of my classes where I mentioned, just in a brief sentence, my diagnosis. I had a couple moments as well where I shared I was autistic to a few friends I had, and it felt liberating to just open up about it. 8th grade was a little more tolerable, even if my struggles to socialize and find my place were at a constant. But that summer, my family and I moved to a new area where I attended high school in a different school district. In hindsight, it was a change that was genuinely appreciated. Although it was a time of nervous excitement, it was a new beginning for where my life could go next, and a lot more opportunities would be made available to me to make the most of. For the first time in a while, I found myself looking up at the stars with my head held up. High school offered adversities that added to the elevated workload and next steps I needed to take for my future. Freshman year especially offered an immense array of learning curves and honestly was a rough start. As the new kid, I was not only transitioning into this next stage of my academic career, but also would be socializing around environments, teachers, and peers that I didn't know. Slowly but surely, I got to meet many people who I became friends with over time. I got used to what was expected of me in classes, and I got situated with my new bedroom, of which by the time I started university, I would see another uplifting change in my life when I switched bedrooms with one of my siblings. My way of socializing even nowadays is that I'm the kind of person who will float around and get to know different people in various friend groups. Thus, I maintain friendships and acquaintances in both individual and larger group settings. As an example, around my junior year of high school, I had a unique group of a handful of friends in one class, sat with another group of friends during the lunch break, and then potentially talked to a few other peers throughout the day in some capacity. I've personally found myself thriving better and keeping in touch with a versatile array of people that'll continually fluctuate and blossom. And on the whole, I was surrounded by a lot of great people while I was there. In classroom settings, I noticed that I interacted a lot more with teachers and peers in high school. I think there was this newfound personal comfortability in becoming my own person. Although there were a few courses that I struggled with academically, I enjoyed a majority of them. I was participating in class more than I had before, and especially in projects where I could express myself to the fullest of my ability. I joined a few clubs and significant extracurriculars that allowed me to contribute to life on campus, with my senior year consumed with balancing regular classes and my roles outside of that. And above all, I was increasingly independent in finding my way. And that growth was seen by my teachers in my high school's resource program, who were incredibly supportive of me and my progress in the program, resulting in no longer needing those additive resources. The day that I was in my last conference regarding my IEP, which consisted of my parents and I, my resource teacher, my designated counselor, and a couple of teachers who had dropped in, I felt an immense weight off my shoulders. I was still given accommodations the first half of high school, which extended towards them being necessary for required standardized tests. My junior year, I accepted the offer to meet for a scheduled one-on-one with my resource program teacher instead of attending a class period like I had gotten used to. It was in place to go over how I was doing and what my schedule each semester would look like, but allowed for an opening in my class schedule. I did take 7 courses all throughout the entirety of middle school and high school, so having the opportunity to take another class that I could potentially choose was an achievement that brought a smile to my face. High school truly had its lows and highs. While I placed a lot of pressure on myself and endured burnout for the first time, I was immensely happier going to school every day and pushed myself to exceed my comfort zone through creative means. From an academic standpoint, when I got recognized for my accomplishments, it felt highly rewarding. When I thrived in ways I never saw doing beforehand personally and creatively, I felt proud of how far I had come from my early childhood. As I mentioned earlier, while I was increasingly open about my diagnosis in high school, the college application process was the first time I really reflected and began expressing my perspective on the autism spectrum. Not to mention that because I was applying to film school, I not only submitted written materials, but also a video submission when applicable. Around this time, I had applied to about a handful of universities, but I knew what I felt was a perfect fit for me. And an application, a sudden interview, and months of waiting later, I got an email and letter sharing the news that I was admitted through what I have called a contracted or second year acceptance into the University of Southern California. The route I was given and took was that I maintained the required GPA quota and amount of course credits at a community college up to when my admission was officially official. And this was all happening when the first Autism Story video was released, as I was still abiding by this. In retrospect, I can say that it was worth taking this opportunity, but was the toughest to endure out of my college experience because of the anticipation I felt from looking forward to being at USC. The workload felt like an equivalent of what I experienced in high school. While I had wonderful interactions with peers and classes I took, the results were rather mixed when it came to instructors. There were a few courses where I happily participated, but otherwise did what I could to blend in and do the best I can to take things day by day. And I do remember spending a significant amount of time in the library to work on homework or study whilst listening to a YouTube video or some music, but at home my time was mostly spent in my room and was primarily focused on fulfilling the academic criteria required of me. I had visited USC's campus a few times between my senior year and in this first year of higher education, and getting to walk around as well as wear a few pieces of regalia ultimately encouraged me to keep going. The first time I even visited solidified USC as my number one choice, so it felt surreal to receive that acceptance packet in the mail with my name on it, especially after completing a whole school year of taking general education courses that I knew I could transfer with, and in an environment that was centered on that objective. I moved into an apartment in the vicinity of USC later that summer, and it was the first time I lived away from home. Of course, I was highly anticipating being on my own and going to school, but I simultaneously missed my family too. There were a lot of learning curves with living independently, navigating roommates, how to best organize the space I had, and being acclimated with new areas and finding my go to personal preferences, thanks to having access to my car and knowing where to walk around campus. Even when it came to joining a handful of clubs, attending a few on campus events and panels, and going to other fun places that were local to where I was staying, I wasn't used to having access to these sort of experiences before that I'd partaken by myself. At USC, I was not only entering as a new student, but I was also entering as a transfer student. In essence, it felt like I had two unique freshman year-esque experiences where I was still finding where I belonged. And I did find out that I had to reapply into the school and major of my choice, which took up a fair portion of my time and headspace that summer prior/first semester at USC, up to when my admission there was officially official. Along with that, as a transfer, there were a few courses I had to accommodate accordingly based on what credits transferred over and what I needed to still satisfy. And I also had to learn the approaches to exams, assignments, research papers, and participation in class that were vastly different from the courses I took my first year. But genuinely, I really enjoyed a vast majority of my courses and professors. While at USC, you're actually placed in smaller classroom environments, and even the larger ones consist of being assigned an additional smaller group you follow up with as part of your schedule, which was really the component of learning there that stands out. And because of this, I was able to easily meet and approach a lot of peers, with some of them being individuals I've kept in touch with. I felt more comfortable interacting and equally was out of my comfort zone. While I was capable of keeping up with lectures and taking part in prompted conversations in class, I was also having to put together presentations for well-regarded individuals who were coming in as guests, and I was engaging with a lot of subject material that was very new to me. I even found a personal connection with faith amidst all of this, and I did openly discuss being autistic where I felt exponentially confident to do so, and I was equally proud for doing as well as I did in courses without the need for any disability-related services. I was really challenged with doing the best I could, and I really did see growth in myself personally and academically. The last almost year of my time at USC wrapped up through learning virtually and graduating amidst the global pandemic, and it certainly placed unexpected adversities onto me and what my future would look like. The last time I was at USC was before I came back home for spring break, which was right before lockdowns had begun. And while it is rather sentimental to talk about it now, I'm just glad to have been able to spend the time I had on campus and to now consider myself an alum. I was able to listen to my graduation virtually from home, surrounded by my family, and with my bachelor's degree in hand within a span of 3.5 years. It really was an accomplishment that I was able to see in my own life because of the support system that I've been blessed with. But also I think what's meant most to me is that I've been able to attain a bachelor's degree in my dream career field through the School of Cinematic Arts, or SCA. Initially, in my senior year of high school, I applied for a bachelor's degree in film and TV production, and while reapplying, I actually had an epiphany. I considered becoming a film and TV director for most of my childhood. Especially around high school, I participated and had created a lot of projects that were heavily focused on picking up a camera and equipment and creating original narratives or documentaries through my YouTube channel or elsewhere. So I thought that my path would be going in that direction. But when reflecting on how I wrote stories like Imagination, how I used to love to research and engage in an array of movies and television shows, and how that evolved over time, and then at the start of my university journey, how I began creating YouTube content centered on media analysis, I realized how passionate I was to learn and talk about it. I had also, through my experience editing, that I wanted to pursue that as well somehow. So I ultimately decided to pursue and eventually attained a bachelor's degree in cinema and media studies, and it really just immediately was the perfect fit for me. The exact day I found out I was a cinema and media studies major was on October 19th, 2018. I was in the middle of one of my classes, which was a lecture course about the history of animation. I had my phone out and happened to have it beside me when I saw the email pop up from SEA saying that I was admitted. And since it was the only course I had that day, I just remember feeling so grateful, so relieved. For almost 2 years, I have been dedicated to persevering to that moment. In my eyes, I was a dream chaser up to that point, and since then, it's felt like my dreams were just beginning to come true. I had a couple of interests that I looked into, which predominantly came from activities I was enrolled in. Because I enjoyed drawing, I did consider becoming an animator in some way. At around 5 or 6 years old, I liked learning about animals, and I did consider becoming a veterinarian or wildlife expert. And I did consider becoming a journalist or documentarian because I had a phase of enjoying nonfiction media. But film and TV is what I consider to be the specific interest that was unique to me. And from a young age, my creativity was how I've always expressed myself. Entertainment at large was a significant outlet of escapism for me. And as I got older, I have enjoyed other forms of media as well. Getting overwhelmed and prone to sensory overload and social outings, and additionally being prone to motion sickness, made my accessibility with media certainly different. Movie theaters and themed entertainment destinations in particular are environments that weren't as accommodating for me to enjoy. Strobe or flashing lights and significant shifts in volume levels, even now, are components that I had to adapt to, and knowing that it was okay to look out for my own comfortability was immensely helpful. While the increase in sensory-friendly environments is a step in the right direction, I do concur that this larger conversation is so important to have consistently, and for the benefit of everyone to enjoy the entertainment they'd like to. But on the bright side, it's only the beginning for me in experiencing social outings like this independently and potentially for the first time. Aside from theater going being considered a special occasion, I for the most part was at home and was accustomed to engaging with media that way. I was introduced to films through VHS tapes and DVDs, and I was introduced to TV through cable. Nowadays, since I've gravitated to utilizing my personal digital devices, I tend to watch media through YouTube or streaming or in a digital format. Drawing and creative writing were the first outlets I found piquing my interest, and helped aid in how I expressed my enrapturement with the media I was watching. Some projects, whether for school or for myself, would consist of hours-long or even days-long commitments just because I loved narrowing my attention to something that was freeing. Moreover, I consider toys and stuffed animals as imaginary friends that come to life when I conceptualized my own stories and adventures, which is something that culminated in me semi-continuing to collect collectibles and related items today. Another outlet was actually through drama and acting courses. Being on stage was more tangible than the make-believe worlds I had conjured up. It was an activity that I did voluntarily want to try out, and I enjoyed it. What started as a couple of background roles in elementary school plays transpired into participating in drama classes all of middle school, and even taking a couple of acting classes outside of that. Although in both of these later cases, while I'm proud of myself for putting myself out there and doing the best I could, I felt discouraged to open up and was often considered too quiet. I rediscovered my admiration for theater in the second half of high school, taking an acting course and then participating in the behind-the-scenes side of drama productions my school held. And I'm glad I did. Nonetheless, while I had partook in acting a bit since, maybe I'll be courageous like I was to maybe look into it and improve. While a lot of my passions for filmmaking were expressed through concepts, via drawings and creative writing, it was in high school when I truly began to pursuing the creations of work I'd be proud of. I made connections on campus through video projects I made in courses and extracurriculars, as well as through a few film camps, where I met some incredible people who I'm glad to still get to know. And in this time frame, when I was simultaneously gifted camera equipment from my family, I started a YouTube channel. I knew of YouTube for a while and I'd watched videos on the site using my family's computer before I began to really engage with YouTube content in middle school. A majority of the content creators I began to follow consistently were reviewers and video essayists that talked about movies and TV, and that has expanded since to other kinds of content too. When I started, I originally thought of the username Carson Geek, which was conceived since I consider myself a geek of media and from my alias Alex Carson. This Carson era, as I refer to it now, allowed me to be the director I aspired to become. The content I had made consisted of me getting comfortable on camera with a few blogs where I introduced myself, using materials and collectibles that I had available to me to create stop motion and live action short films, and more miscellaneous videos, including songs I translated in American Sign Language and montages. When I rebranded to Alex Carson, it was the perfect step in the right direction for me to refine what kind of content I really wanted to move forward with making, in addition to having my channel being identifiable to me. Not long after graduating from high school, I started making what I classified as editorials around media-related topics. I would multitask between 1 to 2 original projects, maybe having up to a handful of ideas at a time. But while I really enjoyed making this content, it took until the Alex era, or this current duration of time of me uploading to YouTube, to have a solidified identity with my creativity. It's been truly rejuvenating, and I'm now balancing a multitude of video essays and reviews, videos about autism and disability representation, occasional videos about me, like this one, and themed video series. This YouTube channel has allowed me to grow in boldness, to connect with others, and to extend my imagination and insight to those who decide to check out what I share. Especially because YouTube is my only platform now. As of deleting social media in 2021, I've also been in a great place personally and mentally to continue with creating content. This channel has been growing, which I'm so thankful for, and I hope to continue with it in the future, and potentially have it be monetized. I have a lot of personal goals that I love to see come to fruition in my future, with the current path I'm taking now in film and video editing, as well as media criticism/analysis and content creation. It's only the beginning with where my personal career in media will take me, as well as the purpose I've tapped into in being one of many voices who speak for those who stand out for being different. Because I'm different too. Our story began with a girl who was just learning about who she was, so much so that at 11 years old, she would take inspiration from how she named 2 of her American Girl dolls to do so. The first doll has long, lighter brown hair and bangs, a hairstyle the girl had before, and who's now named Lauren. The second one has darker brown, short hair, and is now named Alex. This young girl, autistic and of mixed Pacific Islander descent, had these 2 unique dolls that she kept throughout her childhood. Both represented her in different ways, which made the friendship that would culminate into one of her stories all the more invigorating. Lauren and Alex may have once been different entities, but they've become one and the same. I created Alex as a representation of not only who I wanted to become, but also who I didn't see in the world around me growing up. and now I hope to provide that through Alex throughout the rest of my life. I was ignorant of my own diagnosed disability until I found out, and in young adulthood began to fully learn and educate myself on autism, how it's applicable to me and my upbringing, and how everyone is different on the spectrum and not in their own special ways. I've never been normal or perfect, but I love who I am right now and I'm moving forward into becoming. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the support, acceptance, and guidance I've received from my family, friends, acquaintances, mentors, and others. If I were to offer some encouraging words, it's that life isn't ever easy. There are times where you are okay, and there are times where you're not okay too. But I've heard before that the hardest thing to be is yourself, and that's what I've decided to better focus on every day. I'm really grateful that I haven't given up on myself or what I dreamed of achieving, and I'm now beginning to pave my life's path with my own voice. Autism is a part of me. I'm in a better place for knowing it is and embracing it. Everything happens for a reason, and everything that makes you different, makes you unique, is a strength. I know that I am enough, and I hope you know that too.